Mr. Nahorn,
Present.
Mr. Dembinski,
Move to excuse Mr. Janik. He has a letter on file.
Mr. Van Truen.
Second that.
Motion and a second to excuse Mr. Janik. He has a letter on file. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 6-0. He will be excused. We're going to call for the first item, which will be A1851, Finance and Utilities Software Upgrade not to exceed $150,000. We have a representative, Kevin Nye from SSI, and Mr. Vukovic that are here to give us a presentation. Mr. Vukovic.
Good evening, everybody. One of my tasks I did early on with starting with the IT department was to evaluate the existing systems within the city to see where we had some opportunities to improve and protect our information and move forward. And one of the things that was real apparent early on is our current financial software and our utilities billing software, which are both provided by the same company. These screamed out really loud because they are not only old, but they are ancient in technology times. We're talking like 1900s. Only 1999. Still 1900 sounds good. It's old technology. It's actually based on COBOL programming language, and the system itself starts out at 30 years old. A couple of the issues that these disparate systems have is they're located on two separate physical hardware servers, which require obviously two separate maintenance, two separate for the databases and for the hardware. They are not able to communicate any information between the two systems on an automated basis without manually extracting information, uploading, and we want to eliminate as much manual intervention as possible. We have some other common issues, such as right now the way the systems are. At the end of the month, when they're done doing their billing or they're done doing their financial reporting, the systems actually reset themselves, and so there's no historical information kept in the database. So making past years comparisons or trying to help the residents with getting kind of information, they actually have to go to printed reports that are filed and stacked away. The two different systems themselves, once they are upgraded, are going to be sitting in the server farm that's located in the IT tech / area in the police department that we have built up, which obviously has redundancy and also the speed and communication with the rest of the city. At that point, they're going to be able to share information between themselves. We're going to have access to other departments. They're going to be coming back, and the auditor will tell you some of the benefits of that from a financial standpoint. From a utilities billing standpoint, we're going to be able to also have some automated integration to our AMI metering system that has been in place. Right now, it's a manual process to get those reads implemented into the billing system. We are going to be able to get almost unlimited reporting based on some of the actual screenshots that are, it's real flexible, without going into too much details. Each individual user can customize what they're seeing on their screens and allowing them to export and create reports of any type they want, which is going to be much beneficial to their job in helping provide information to the clients, to the residents themselves. We actually can create landlord lists, being able to track not only problem accounts, but also keep notes historically. Notes right now that are kept on properties and for residents are not historically kept. And so to find that information after a certain amount of time is not there, but will be there in an upgraded system itself. Being able to track historically by the property itself over the life of the data that's being collected, as well as a separated user. So if an individual goes from house to house, instead of getting a new account number like they do now and lose that historical information, their information will actually be able to pull up as long as we have the data to go back to and be able to report back to the resident saying, hey, look, this is your historical information. Let's see, we talked about all that kind of stuff. The ability to take that financial information will also be transmitted and shared with the financial side of it. But it's gonna be all one database, one centralized system, which is gonna reduce our costs because right now we're spending money on those, trying to support those two systems. Obviously, the big gain we're getting here is the improved functionality, availability, and improved services that we're gonna be able to. I'll let the Mr. Auditor here to talk more about the finance side of the benefits.
Thanks, Steve. So I think just in general, something that is very important, right, is ease of use. Looking at a solution that we're using that's nearly 20 years old, trying to bring that into modern era, being able to talk to each other, some of these things that Steve pointed out, but more particularly looking at improving our payables process or invoicing process. Payroll becomes much more efficient, timekeeping and PTO tracking becomes electronic, right? So gone are the ways of paper and worrying about what offices have turned in their timesheets in order to generate payroll on a bi-weekly basis. Yeah, I think this system will allow us to speed up our financial reporting, will give us real-time analytics and reporting that you guys will all have access to as well, either through ad hoc reports or reports that SSI can help us create. And you guys can log into any time versus waiting until the end of the month that I send a report out that is sometimes hard to read. The budgeting process becomes very easy, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, right? We've all seen Excel spreadsheets, right? That sometimes have errors in computing and accuracy and all that fun stuff. This becomes an electronic process, right? Departments will have access to generate their budgets within the software, and it also then ties back to your financial system, right, from a general ledger perspective. All updated in real time. And let's see, what else do I have? Direct deposits. So we do have some employees throughout the city that are still on paper checks. This is going to be a big push of mine, is to get those folks onto direct deposit. We can email stubs out versus mailing the hard copies out. So when you think about the potential time saved from manual effort of folding paper, stuffing envelopes, putting postage on it, getting it out every day, I'm a big proponent of pushing for as much elimination of waste as we can when it comes to using paper. There is a tremendous amount of money we spend as a city on postage every year. So I think if you guys had visibility to that, you'd be kind of surprised. So there's a lot more benefits, but I think Steve's really touched on a decent amount between myself. We think with the mayor, this is a very important initiative for both the utilities department and the finance and auditing department to get on board with. So, Mr. Mayor.
And then this also comes with the support from our service workers. Mr. Murthy's here from our utility superintendent. He takes care of all the utilities. Those people all support this upgrade. They're going to find it very beneficial to their job also. And we also need to talk about paying for it. It wasn't put in on the paper, but we've used the 250 account in the past for technology. So I would hope that we would spend the 250 capital outlay account money. And I think the vendor has been gracious enough to break this up into several years worth of payments with no interest. So that's going to make this a little less painful. But there's plentiful money in and that's traditionally known as the cable account, the 250. So hope you.
One more thing. I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but the purchase order process today, if everyone in the room is familiar with how we do POs, and recs are generated on a paper form and carbon copy, and it's not an actual carbon copy for the rec or the PO. You actually have to sign it multiple times. It's a lot of fun. But that process is also something that we can automate through this tool, right? So electronically generate the POs, and there's a workflow that sends it from department to department from an approval standpoint. And you can stamp approve it as time and date stamped all the way down the chain. So that's another huge time saver in terms of manual effort and passing departments and things like that. So
I just want to make a quick comment about the requisition forms. The only one downfall to that is going to put my daughter out of a volunteer job. She comes in every week and files those for the safety service director. So we're going to have to find something else for Audrey to do when we do this. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
That's the only thing I had. I think you covered all the points. The PO requisition also plays into the budgeting process. The PO, once that PO has actually been created, it's going to be allocated out of the budget so that there's not any confusion of how much money has been still taken out of my line item. And right now we do not have that with the paper process. So that's going to be something that's going to be very beneficial to Derek's department as well, so. That's all I had, in case anybody had any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Winarski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're looking at $150,000 approximately upfront. What are the annual costs beyond that?
Annual costs stay the same, pretty much. I think there's a little bit increase. There's a small increase, but there's also, we're adding different modules that we didn't have previously, such as the budgeting process, which is gonna increase it, I believe it was $3,000 a year total for annual costs, additional to what we already pay.
It would be, for the accounting and payroll side, for the additional module, it'd be $2,100 annually. For utility billing, it would be $3,300 annually. And there's not been a decision yet on asset management, so that was separate. If you do asset management, it would be another $1,500. So if you did the whole thing as proposed, that's another, about almost $6,000 annually.
Are there any support costs or anything associated with this?
That is the support.
Okay, and for how many years is that good for?
That number goes into effect 3 months after you go live, and then you're just subject to whatever our annual increases are. Right now, those range from 3 to 5%. It just depends on the economy, where we're at, costs we have to cover, if there's any major changes. As an example, a few years ago, we did a 7.5% increase. The year that ACA came out, we're all aware of ACA, correct? The Affordable Care Act and all that reporting. We didn't charge our entities to add all that reporting into our systems. We just went back and said, we're gonna take a bigger increase in our support fees than what we normally would do. Didn't even come close to covering our costs, but it was a little bit extra. So if there's something major that happens legislatively, there might be a bigger increase, but I've been here 4 years and they've all been 3 to 5% except for that one.
Okay, so we're getting pretty much standard package, and there's 3 options to upgrade. I think it was asset management, it was the 2 other that you had mentioned.
Yeah, asset management is something that you're not using now.
Right.
That you're using then. When you think about asset management, it's more about preparing the assets for reporting purposes for the city, not asset management that I have, 3 pencils and 4 adding machines, that type of thing. So it's more meant for your CAFR presentation and that type of things. And the other one, the increase for accounting and payroll, was for the advanced budgeting module that the auditor talked about earlier. That's something that's new. So to give a little background so you know, like I said, right now you guys have 2 separate accounts with us. We have one with the utilities department and one with the city auditor, because they came on at different times and they wanted to be separated. As part of this, now they will be combined. But also as part of this upgrade on the accounting side, accounting and payroll side, you're not paying any additional license fees to move to our new product because you were at a higher support level with us. So you're getting basically the software for free, and all you're paying for is the conversion of the data to the training. Where on the utility side, they were on a lower support plan, so they're just getting a discount from our normal prices instead of getting it everything for free. So the price that you see that they presented is actually quite a bit less than if you were coming from outside. Once you're a customer of ours, we're going to keep you a customer of ours, so as part of that, we give reduced pricing to our current customers.
Okay, one final question.
Sure.
So the current software we have is yours?
Yes.
You got 20 years out of it?
Actually, that software is about 30 years old.
Wow, that speaks volumes for you.
It does.
Not bad.
The product that we have now, actually, the accounting payroll's been out in the market for 8 years. The utility billing's been in the market for 3. And we just did our first major update to the system just this last summer for 8 years. So we'll continue to upgrade, just like we upgraded the product you have now. You didn't have the same product for 20 years. We did some upgrades to it. But behind the scenes, the database was still the same. Everything was the same. We just put some extra features in it over the years. So yeah, 20 years is a long time.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this piece of software is going to be utilized by the entire city's department.
Yes.
And it's going to be stored, the software, it's going to be stored on servers located in the police department.
Correct.
And So that'll be one centralized data collection and functionality system will be there at the police department and those server rooms.
Correct.
The $150,000 a one-time fee,
For this, yes, that's correct.
and then yearly it'll be a $6,800 if I did my numbers right, which you should.
Plus,
1,600
that- that's
increase over our
Increase
current-
over what you're paying now.
And what are we currently paying now?
I did not bring that with
I
me.
don't know that answer.
I should have looked that up, I'm sorry, Councilman.
10, 20, 30, 50?
Probably.
So around 20,
I'm gonna guess,
Yeah.
since you have electric utilities,
approximately
it's
20.
between 15 and 20 would be my guess.
So we're gonna budget 20% increase in our software and support, correct?
That's one of the reasons for the increase is because we're adding different functionality that we did not have previously.
Like this asset management. So
Asset
it's helping
management,
capture.
maybe, but there's also the analytics. There's two modules we're adding, with the analytics and
Asset management,
potentially asset management.
right, those would be the two.
So those two pieces are new.
Oh, and departmental time, if you're gonna do departmental time entry as well.
We had that.
And budgeting.
Oh, that's right, we did, we changed that.
Sorry,
You're right.
budgeting is a new ad.
So budgeting and another way.
Then the, thank you, Mr. Chair, let me continue, just, the second piece on this, I guess this is, I can wait till we get into budgeting, but, this is something that's been used by all departments. When we had other upgrades and issues, the mayor had billed each department a portion of the cost of upgrades in IT, servers and so forth. Is this going to hit the cable television 250? And will it be picked up in other aspects of the budget, or will this revenue that is specific to this account be replaced?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
I would hope that the initial cost of this upgrade would come from the cable account, then we'll do the overhead allocations for the annual fees, is what my hope would be.
We have, my understanding of this cable television account was designed to make sure that we have the ability to make this city, its administrative and its city council side, to make it accessible by the community, allow us to be a little bit more transparent, and allow people that couldn't make it down here to the meeting to be able to see what's going on, to watch the proceedings, to watch how local government's happening. And I'm not sure that this falls under what this was intended for, under the cable television fund. I know you brought in some really good, Mr. Buchbach brought in some really good options for us to improve that, which I'm discussing in other avenues and other hardware and software upgrades. But this here seems to me like it's an operating expense that should be pulled out of the departments that they're going to be used by. I have a problem with $150,000 coming out of the cable television budget. I don't see this as allowing our residents to allow us to be more accessible to our residents. I think if anything, this allows us to operate the government a little bit more efficiently, which I'm in support of, and I like what I hear. I'm just not sure that the cable television budget and taking the whole $150,000 is the way to go. I'd like to see that handled differently. And outside that, if I have any further questions, I yield till then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Currently, you pay $19,760.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I want to ask for that.
Mr.
If I know
Ventura.
they still know, then we'll talk about something else.
The mayor's mentioned a few times in the past his desire to make the paper bills that, utility bills that residents get a bit more comprehensive, upgrade them a little bit. Is this going to involve that at all, or is that still something you
I
plan on
think
visiting?
that's already in the works without this. I think
Without it?
I think we can do that without this, and it's already being looked at.
There's not an outlay of large cash involved to doing that.
Terrific.
So that is the process.
That's all.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Wienerski.
I'd make the motion to send this to the floor council.
Mr. Dembinski.
Second.
Further comments or questions? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this the only provider in town?
Is this, provider opportunity to the city for financial billing utilities? No. It is the current one that allows us for relatively, I know it sounds like a lot of money, but we are getting a large discount to keep our current system, which we're fairly happy with, but there's some technological challenges to it that we want to upgrade from. It is probably the, I don't want to say predominant application being used, but neighboring cities use it as well, such as Vermillion is an example. It's not something that is, we're not being the guinea pigs on that.
And $150,000, are we putting this out to bid?
It's same within the same company, we would not put it out bid.
I guess so. Well, you can answer, but
No, well, I can't answer. Actually, I need to look at that and see what exceptions municipalities have. For instance, county commissioners have an exception for technology purchases. Some state institutions by statute have those exceptions. This is the first I've heard that we're not bidding, so I was looking right now for municipalities. I see nothing that permits it. Perhaps there's case law. So if between now and the next, I guess, the council meeting, I'd like to take a look at it and see whether or not it's required to be bid out. If this gentleman has any information for me after the meeting, perhaps he could share with me pertaining to the exceptions to the Ohio Revised Code.
I can tell you they're referring to 319, and I don't remember for the counties.
Right.
I can get you that exception there where it talks about software being a proprietary business and so forth. I know you guys are statutory, so I don't know if that's a stretch for there. I can tell you that there's quite a few times we do get into some bid situations, but most of the time when our people upgrade, very rarely do they bid. There are times that they do. I don't know what exceptions they're using because they just tell me they're not going to bid, and I've not gotten it. But I can certainly check with my bosses and see if they have anything from a city standpoint that can give you.
Right. So the county commissioners is 307. The airport authorities is another section that gives this exception. The problem is I don't see if the legislator has, the State House has changed it for municipalities.
Right.
They should.
Right.
But
So with that, and you made, sounds to me like with the amount of discounts, and since we're upgrading for you, you probably wouldn't have bid anyway. I mean, this could be a moot point. But I think that we need to make sure that we do our due diligence and put this out for bid if we have to.
And I can, if you don't mind, I can tell you that the price you have today, if you put it out to bid and you go through a very formal bid process, that's very big, that number that you see there's going to change. Because for us to do a full bid packet, depending on what you ask for, I'm involved, my bosses are involved with financial information, my IT people are involved, my developers are involved, you get really complex. Sometimes we spend 200 to 250 hours preparing an RFP. It's not just as, depending on how technical you get. So if you do, I'm not saying don't RFP, but if you do, you really need to be cognizant as to how big the RFP and what you ask for, because those specs can really change your numbers. That's what you're doing. Just as a side note for that.
Yeah, I think we also just need to be aware, and do some investigation to figure out, since this is an upgrade with an existing provider, are we subject to an RFP regardless of the amount? If we wanted to go out to bid, I mean, Kevin is right, but buying a brand new product versus an upgrade is getting into a much more costly endeavor. And so I would seek out if we can investigate whether or not this particular process and the way we're going about it requires a bid.
Thank you.
Mr. Intrude.
Mr. Pitak makes a terrific point that I was going to bring up. One thing that scares me the most about the idea of going with another company for this kind of an upgrade is the fact that this isn't like buying a new truck. You're talking about a whole lot of data, a whole lot of records, a whole lot of information that they are, number one, already familiar with. They've already worked with us on. And number two, that would, if we chose another provider, would have to be successfully transferred over onto the management system, and just hope that there aren't any mistakes that are made, that it's transparent. that the process is quick enough for us to do it at the right value. So it worries me a lot when I hear, should we put this out for bid? The thought of transferring all this information over to another company to manage it for us. I think that there are a whole lot of pitfalls there that we should consider. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
I think that since we don't have to do it with your company, that would be a zero line item there, and the rest of the people that have to bid on this are gonna have to embed that into their bid, which obviously should make you a clear winner. I just wanna make sure our city is doing it properly.
No,
And we're being,
I was just telling you from my standpoint what I see. I'm not saying you
Sure.
shouldn't RFP.
Sure.
I'm not here to tell any of you how you should do your business, so. If I could make one other comment, you mentioned about other players. I can tell you that on the payroll accounting side of things, we are the largest provider of software in the state of Ohio for governmental entities, next to UAN. Because UAN is the small package that the state owns and runs. All the small villages and all the small townships use it. Once you get past that and you get into people that are buying software, we provide that service to more entities in the state of Ohio than anybody else.
where are you from, Kevin? I mean, where are you guys out of?
Our offices right now are in Lebanon, Ohio, which is just north of Cedar Point. We will be moving to the greater Dayton area though in February. Our lease is out, is up, our business has been growing, so we need to go to bigger space.
Ohio based.
But yeah, we are Ohio
Ohio
based.
based. Okay.
Probably, I don't have the right number, probably 80 to 85% of our business is in Ohio. We do
Ohio.
do other states, but
That's good to hear.
most of it's in Ohio.
Thank you.
Is that north of Columbus?
No, actually it's not by Cincinnati.
Okay.
You got Kings Island, right? The Cedar Point,
South,
Kings
north.
Island,
Oh,
Kings
Kings
Island.
I meant Kings Island. I didn't mean,
Kings
you're
Island.
right, I meant Kings Island, just
Yeah.
north of Kings Island.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Anyone else?
gotcha.
Seeing none, Mr. Dembinski?
Will the law department be able to have an answer for us by the next week on if this is something that will need to go to bid or not?
Yeah, I'll do some research this week.
Okay.
You know.
If that's the case, then I feel comfortable passing this on, and then we can, if we need to, we could always send it back to committee or table it at that point. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry,
There's
Mr. Chair,
no-
just
there's
real
no
quick,
way
and I
it's-
apologize.
It's an
Are we
upgrade.
going to get anything in our physical hands on this before this gets to out of committee or?
What would you like to see?
I'd like to see an outline of what we're receiving and what we're paying for, and what you're expecting to have.
I'll have that for you at the conclusion of this meeting, I'll pass it out.
I appreciate that, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can get my eyes on it, would be great.
All right, there's a motion to take A 1851 to the floor council. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries 6-0. Mr. Dembinski?
Move to recess?
We need to go into
Executive.
the executive committee.
Mr. Nahorn?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to recess so that we can go into executive committee because we have people. Mr. Mayor.
That's a quick question. Are we going into the, for the executive committee?
The executive committee, and then we will come back and finish finance after. That way we can get the chief out of here
Gotcha.
instead of having him sit here through the whole budget and everything.
All right, thank you.
Okay. There's a motion and a second to recess. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We stand recessed at 7:30.
There's,
Thanks, Kevin.
I can't imagine that they would require it to go out to bid. It's an existing
We'll be right back.
program that we would just be upgrading. It's like if you're
Yeah.
buying an upgrade to
I
your
put one of these
stick around.
Yeah, and they can come and see the introduction. Yeah, I mean,
A motion to go into executive session.
We gotta open the committee first.
I mean, there should be, right?
There will. Yeah, there will. We have to go into
yeah,
the
first we
committee
have
first.
to go into the committee.
All right. That's where I got lost.
It's one or something, you know, as far as.
Well, I mean, if you give me insight into it, I'm sure it'd be appreciated. Otherwise, we're just gonna see, yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
I'd like to call the meeting of the Executive Committee to order today, November 5th, 2018 at 7:32. We're here to discuss an ordinance creating within the city of Amherst, Ohio, position for full-time civilian administrator in the city of Amherst, Ohio Police Department, and establishing salary terms and other conditions of employment. I guess from here, we'll go right to the mayor, and then if you want to introduce the chief. and
Okay.
from there.
The chief and the safety service director and I have been working on this new position for quite some time. I'm probably just going to go ahead and turn it over to safety service director, and I think we'll, and the police chief, Kucharik, is here to discuss the option also.
So, as the mayor said, this has been an ongoing process for a number of months. Chief had originally approached the mayor. The mayor put it on my plate, so to speak. The chief and I met probably no fewer than would seem probably to the chief about a dozen times, but it was probably closer to 6 times, I'm sure. But we were able to hammer this out and put this position together with the benefit package and the request in front of you. So I think at this time I'll turn it over to the chief.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about a position that I'm asking for to be added to the police department, and within that discussion, there may be some things that you may not want to disclose publicly about numerous operations in the agency, and for that, I'm going to ask for some guidance on the executive.
If we wanted to go through,
If you could touch on all the issues that don't pertain to ORC 12122G6, which would be details relative to security arrangements for a public body, if the disclosure of matters would reasonably be expected to jeopardize security of the public body. So,
Okay.
do you want to, can you do that?
Yeah, I can touch briefly on some of the issues. So, quickly, the memo that you received a couple of weeks ago from in your emails was an email from me, or a memo from me outlining some of the different things that we were discussing with this civilian administrative position. And in that email, I talked about things, how they were back in the 1960s in the police department and how they were now. I talked about the reason that we were looking at maybe adding a civilian position as opposed to adding a sworn position like another sworn sergeant or another sworn lieutenant. I talked about what some of the duties that the civilian position would take over if we were to get that position. Some things that I didn't talk about in that memo that I'm going to talk about tonight is identifying some of the needs that I recognize as the police chief in our department that maybe we're not accomplishing to the level that I feel they should be accomplished. And some of my duties in the department are that of maybe being a risk manager and identifying some of the risk that exists in our agency and how to handle those. And most of those risks a lot of times deal with the employees, the officers, the dispatchers, the sergeants, and the things that they have to deal with, and identifying what level of risk those are and how to best handle and mitigate some of those risks. We have talked about this since probably 2014 in the department, and we kind of termed the high-risk, low-frequency type of events. And what I mean by high-risk, low-frequency are the the things that you don't do all the time in the police department, but when you do them, you better get them right. And you better make sure that the people that are doing them know what the policies are, know what the procedures are, and know what the application of any particular item is and how to apply that, whether it's the use of force or pursuits or anything like that. Back in 2014, we started talking about it. 2015 and 16, we started identifying what some of those high-risk, low-frequency events were, and we went as far as to determine how often we really needed to train on some of these things, whether it was like a category of training 3 times a year or 2 times a year or 1 time a year. And just to give you an idea of some of the things that we're talking about when I talk about high risk, low frequency, use of force. Those are one of the events that we kind of identified as a train multiple times a year, as often as you can. So that includes use of deadly force, use of less than lethal force, and everything on the force continuum. Pursuits I already talked about. Of course, those are the big things that when a police chase or pursuit happens and things go wrong, it leaves the city open for liability, it leaves the officers open for liability, and sometimes worse people are hurt and injured. So these are, again, some of the things that we want to make sure that our officers are trained in. Firearms, that's obviously a high-risk, low-frequency event. Felony traffic stops is one of those. We also included some things that we determined that we can train on a couple times a year. And I'll run through a list of these so you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. Search and seizure, defensive tactics, weapon retention, emergency vehicle operation. Below 100 training is training that we've sent everybody to that talks about the 3 things that typically kill officers. If it's not from an adversary, it's unnecessary speed, not wearing your vest, and not wearing your seatbelt. And so while we send people to training, part of our job is to make sure that they're adhering to the training that we send them to. Things like radio usage and how to switch channels on the radio, and that may seem silly, but the radios today are not like they were 20 years ago, where you had a couple channels and guys are typically on the same radio channel for 95% of the time that they're working, and at one time they need to switch channels and go to a TAC channel or something. Unless we challenge them and train them how to do it and remind them how to do it and make them do it under certain scenarios, when they really need to do it, they're not going to know how to do it. Domestic violence is a topic that we would like to train on a couple times a year. Care custody of prisoners, active shooter response, something we haven't had to do 56 years ago, even 15 years ago. Those are categories that are adding to our training. And then we have the categories that we identified as maybe a minimum once a year training. Sexual harassment type training, at least making sure that they read the policy and sign off on it. Our standards of conduct, the taser deployment, when to deploy a taser and what you do after you deploy a taser. Ballistic shields, we never trained with ballistic shields before, and we've been purchasing ballistic shields for the past couple of years, and if you don't train guys how to use it, believe me, when they go to grab a ballistic shield the first time and they try to hold a shield and fire a firearm, unless they've done it multiple times, it's not going to work out well. Breaching tools, we have never trained on breaching tools, and with today's day and age and the society of the active shooter in the schools, we've been buying more breaching tools, and as a matter of fact, tonight guys are doing that kind of training out at the range. So a lot of these things that I'm talking about are not necessarily things that we haven't been training on, but from my perspective, I'm concerned about our past and where our future is going to go as far as completing some of this training. That's just for the road patrol. There's a whole host of things for our civilian staff, our dispatchers, and our records people that have their own categories. And I can kind of run through some of those. Toward the end of the conversation, I'll kind of give you an idea of my assessment of where we're at in that. And I think that's the conversation that we should probably have offline, if you will. So I'm want me to keep going, or?
Well, I mean, do you have anything else you could add before we, I mean, that you haven't touched, it would not?
I can talk about the dispatch segment and some of the training that we've identified that we want to see happen and that maybe isn't necessarily happening. For dispatchers pursuits, officer requesting
Can I-
help, yes.
Can I?
Yes?
It might actually, some of that might be more appropriate for our next step. I think maybe just to give us an overall big picture of what administratively this particular function itself is going to do.
So the need that I've identified is that there's training that we need to improve on that either we have fallen short on, in my opinion, or simply isn't happening. And it's not because the administrative staff doesn't care or hasn't been doing what they should be doing. The bottom line is there's simply too many things that 3 police administrative people are dealing with these days compared to 15 years ago or 50 years ago. And one of the abilities.
Chief, so with that information, when he goes into detail about that issue, I think we fall right within Ohio Revised Code 121.22G6 pertaining to the safety protocols. So if you want to go into detail about that, Chief, then we need to go into executive session. If you have other issues not pertaining to that, then let's get it out of the way.
Yeah, I think
first.
pretty much everything after that falls into
Okay.
that category of kind of giving an update of maybe where we're at.
Thank you. So, to identify, we cannot on the floor right now without going into executive session, we can't identify what civilian responsibilities, what responsibilities the civilian administrator could potentially be tasked with?
We might be able to do that at the other end of the executive session, so it makes a little bit more sense. Is that possible? After executive session?
If that's the prerogative.
It might make more sense in doing it in that fashion. I can make that recommendation.
And if there's no questions from council, Mr. Van Churn?
I'd move that we go into executive session.
Pursuant to
If that motion is correct.
Pursuant to-
Pursuant to further information about the creation of this position that requires us to be in executive session.
Can you give us the quote, Tony?
I'll give you the quotes. Ohio Revised Code 121.22G6, and you need to state this, which pertains to the details relating to the security arrangements of the public body.
And
Pursuant
to
to
details related to security.
Arrangements of the public body.
Thank you, my apologies.
Just to make sure I have it correct. According to ORC 121.22.G6, safety protocol pertains to details related to security arrangements of public body.
Yes.
Is that exactly how we want this worded?
That's correct.
Okay, so I have a motion by Councilman Van Churn to go into executive session. So we're going to,
Give me a second.
and do we have a second? Mr. Cowger has a second. All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Narski.
Not a problem, Mr. Chair. You're busy.
I'm taking notes, copious notes.
If I could, for the law director, it's been a while since we've done executive session. Could you refresh our memories, or my memory, what we're allowed to ask, how the conversation, there's really narrow parameters what we're allowed to discuss, isn't there?
You're allowed to discuss the matters which we just indicated, the security, or, find it again, the security of the public body, matters pertaining to the security of the public body.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narski. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion on the floor to go into executive session. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Let it be noted that we're using the same attendance, so that will be a 6-0 vote.